All right, let's play another game of good buff, good nerf, bad buff, bad nerf. Where we're going to go through all these balance changes, and I'm going to say whether or not I think it was what I just said. Good buff, good nerf, bad buff, bad nerf. I also want to say that I think that Saber has done an excellent job with the patches so far. If you compare where this game is at right now in this game's life cycle compared to other games at this point in their life cycle, it's night and day. Like, Saber has done a much better job with consistent patches, and now we have new content just 2 months after the game initially released. I hope that Demon Mains also realize how lucky they have it compared to Dead by Daylight. Because when I played Dead by Daylight, I was a killer main for like the first 3 years that game came out. And 3 months into that game, killers had to deal with survivors who had infinites on every map, Saboteur, the original Saboteur perk, and hooks that did not respawn, the original Sprint Burst, the original self-care. It was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare to deal with. So I'm thankful that they've done such a good job balancing, but there is one thing I will say that I wish and hope that they will do better in the future, and that is that please don't put things into the game and not include it in the patch notes. There were some seriously significant changes to support Ash that completely changes the way that he plays, and it was not included in the patch notes. That's something that has to be included. Like, something that big has to be included. You'd also think that they would have included this big change where now demons are slowed down when they enter buildings, because that's a very controversial change. A lot of demons don't like that at all. They don't like that change at all. And it has now caused a bug where demons are going into houses, getting slowed down, and then that is persisting even when they leave the house, and then they are slowed for the entire match. And that's an awful bug. So it would have been nice to see those things included in the patch notes. All right, so first thing, let's go over ranged weapon damage changes. Everything got nerfed across the board. It's only rare and above here. Commons apparently did not get touched. And in fact, it looks like, as you can see here, like even the rare shotgun didn't get touched. It was just the epic and the legendary, but otherwise, I think rare through legendary got touched on everything else. Is this clearly a nerf? Is it good or bad? I think it is a good nerf. I think that ranged weapon damage was still kind of out of control. There were times when you would get like a legendary shotgun, and if I'm spec'd into damage, which you should be if you're a hunter, because you're the damage dealer's the hunter, then you're going to be two-tapping bosses. So I think this was a good nerf overall. Truthfully, I'm a little iffy on whether or not it was necessary to nerf some of the, like, did they really need to nerf the lever action rifle? Like, I don't think the lever action rifle was much of a problem. It was mostly shotguns that were a problem. Shotguns, when you went up close and just blasted somebody, the boomstick in particular, but all the shotguns were really bad because you could just annihilate bosses in 2 shots. I will say this though, I'm a little concerned because I don't know what you do with hunters. Maybe they're in a good spot now, but it's like, if you nerf hunter damage too much, then it gets to the point where it's like, why are you bringing a hunter anymore? Just bring a warrior. Like, because at that point, hunters are just a straight downgrade from warriors, because if you get to the point where their ranged weapons do as much damage as a warrior's melee weapon, then it's worse in every way, because hunters have to worry about ammo, and you know, warriors do not with their melee weapons. And melee weapons have the bonus of typically dealing a lot more dismemberment and balance bar damage than ranged weapons do. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes, because I've already seen people on Reddit especially. Oh boy, Reddit is something else. This game's subreddit is something else. Who complain that I had somebody come into my Twitch chat yesterday as well, who complained that it's still too much damage and it needs to be nerfed even further. And so my concern is, like, I think if you nerf it any further, you're going to get to the point where they're dealing as much damage with ranged weapons as you deal as a warrior with melee weapons, and then hunters just become obsolete because they have less health. They deal equal amounts of damage in exchange for having to worry about everything I just talked about. So it'll be interesting, because I don't know where you go from here, because maybe they're right. Maybe they do still deal too much damage. I don't think they do. I just played Ed and I got a rare boomstick, and it took over 6 headshots up close to kill an evil Ash. So I'm not sure if it needs to be nerfed even further, but if you do, I'd be careful, because then I don't know what you do about warriors, because warriors then just become better in every way. So I think it's a good nerf for now, but I'd be hesitant to nerf it further, and I'll be interested to see how this shakes out for the overall meta, and whether or not hunters become too weak and then warriors become too strong. But for now, I think it's good. All right, melee weapon dismemberment damage. Chainsaw got very slightly buffed. It went from 75 dismemberment to 77, but the legendary got a more significant increase, where it went from 80 to 85. So every rarity got buffed across the board. I think this is a good buff. The chainsaw should be the best melee weapon in the game, period, because it is the most iconic weapon. The idea that it's like not as good as a sledgehammer is really weird to me. Like, even the axe I could understand if it was like on the same level as the chainsaw or close to it, because the axe, it turns out, is kind of an iconic weapon in its own right, because it's used so much in the first Evil Dead, and then he even references it in Army of Darkness, or not? Is it Army? No, I think it's Ash versus Evil Dead, where he like stops him and is like, "It's a trick. Get an axe." Like, so the axe is a very important weapon as well. But even still, I think the chainsaw is the most iconic weapon. It just is. Like, when people think of Evil Dead, what do they think of? They think of the dude who has a chainsaw arm. That's the first thing they think about. It's even more iconic, I think, than the boomstick. So it should be the best weapon in the game. I like that it got buffed. I still don't know if it makes it the best weapon in the game, but it'll at least make it compete. So I like that a lot. I like that this got buffed. Support range. I'm not even going to change this because it's a buff and it's a good buff. The 5-meter range on Pablo and Evil Dead 1 Ash was terrible. The interesting thing about this, though, too, is that it's simultaneously a buff and a nerf, because it's a buff for Evil Dead 1 Ash and Pablo, but it's a nerf for Cheryl, because Cheryl had some sort of bug that I believe made her range max out at 15 meters, because for some reason her range was leveling up as she leveled up and causing it to max out at 15, and 15 was quite big. So now that's been nerfed by 7 meters, whereas the other two got buffed by 3 meters. 8 meters is fine. Honestly, it felt good with 15 meters on Cheryl. But 8 meters net buff for the other two is nice, because now they don't feel like you have to be cheek to cheek with people. And I think it's a good buff overall. Yeah, there's not much more to say. It makes it easier to play support. Without that, it basically made it so playing Evil Dead 1 Ash and Pablo in solo queue especially was impossible, because nobody would hurt around you when you were going to use your healing items. So now it's much, much easier. Possessed units damage. Berserker went from 35 to 45. Demi Elagos went from 50 to 60. Elagos went to 60 to 65, so it got buffed. This is obviously a buff, and I'm going to say it's a good buff. I think everyone knew that Elagos was the weakest of the three, and anything that makes them a little bit better is a good change in my opinion. Yeah, there's not much more to say. It's just a slight buff to damage, and based on the changes to everything else that made it so that damage got nerfed like across the board, or like maintain and possession costs and balance bar stuff, not damage, but all that stuff got nerfed across the board for basic units. So upgrading the overall damage of every unit that Elagos has, I think, is a positive change to try to make him more in line with the other two demons. So I think this is a very good buff. Cars, possessed car percentage of infernal energy subtracted per hit, minus 20% to 10%. Car damage to survivors, 175 to 200. So that's a buff on both ends, and I think that's a good buff. It stinks for me as a solo queue player, because it makes it that much harder to stop. Like before, it was almost impossible to stop a car getting possessed and driving off if you were by yourself. Now it's literally impossible. Now it's like you cannot stop the car from driving away. So that's also a huge nerf to that strategy that you would very rarely see, where each person like jumps into a car, or at least even just one person jumps into a car and then drives off and kind of distracts the demon. Now the demon has a very easy time just possessing it and driving it off and stranding you somewhere really bad. So that's a huge nerf to that strategy. But I think its main use is to make it so if a full group is together and you possess it and they all get kicked out, it gives you a chance of driving the car off. Now it's like the group has to work to, like all four of them have to focus the car to stop it from driving off. And I think that's a good thing, because now it gives demon players a chance to get that car out of there, and it punishes the survivors if they're not making a heads up play and all working together to hit the car and stop it from being driven off. Car damage to survivors being buffed is great. If truthfully, it could probably be buffed even more, to be honest. If you get hit by a car, you are a complete jabroni. Like, it's really hard to get hit by a car in this game, because it's like cars are so wonky in the way they drive, and it's so easy to dodge out of the way. Dude, if you get hit by a car, you should probably be taking like half your health and damage, to be honest, because it's so easy to dodge a car. And yeah, I really believe that could be buffed even further. So overall, I think it's a good buff for demons. Infernal energy unit possession cost. The basic unit initial cost has been changed from 20 to 60, and maintaining the cost has been changed from 0.15 to 0.04. That's on the Warlord unit. And we don't really need to go through all this because it's been changed across the board. All of these got nerfed. So now every single unit for both basics and elites, which I thought was kind of interesting, but basics and elites have been nerfed so that the initial cost is much higher, and it costs much more to maintain them once you do possess them. This is obviously a nerf, and I think it's a great nerf. The great thing that these devs did too is they made it a trade-off to where in the very beginning of the game, it's more difficult to possess units, but then they made it even easier to possess units in like mid to late game. So they made a great trade-off here. It would have been pretty bad if they had just nerfed basic possessions, and that's all they did, and then they just, you know, left demons out high and dry on everything else, and we're just like, good luck. But they did buff the demon in mid to late game. So I love this change. It makes it so that you're not really going to have matches anymore where the game's going to end in like the first 2 to 3 minutes. It can still happen, but it only happens if the survivors play really, really stupid, which is how it should be. You should only be losing games in the first 2 to 3 minutes if the survivors are playing like idiots, where like one person runs off by themselves, they get caught. At that point, as the survivor team, you deserve to lose in the first 2 to 3 minutes. This is mostly stopping super good demons from finding you in the first minute before you even have a chance to loot, and just spamming you with possessions and never letting up the pressure so that you never have time to loot. And then you're burning through all your resources and eventually the demon just wears you down. I've had games like that before this patch where I played super sweaty demons who just spam warlord basics, and it's like you never even get a chance to find any good loot. And by the time you do maybe find any good loot, they've already damaged your whole team so much and run through all your healing items to where it's too late. And now the game's over. So this fixes that problem. So it's a great nerf. I should have had a thing that said great nerf. Not even a good nerf, it's great. Infernal energy possession unit costs at events. The cost has been nerfed from 40 to 20, maintained cost from 35 to 15. So across the board for basics and elites on Puppeteer. Well, Puppeteer basics got buffed here, and then the elites for the other three, for all three demons, have also been buffed. This is a buff, very good buff. This is a good patch, as you can tell. I've agreed with everything so far. So obviously Puppeteer basics need to be buffed across the board. They were the worst basic by far. The only real strategy that you even had with Puppeteer basics was that dunking strat where you would use the ability to rip off your head and then run up to somebody and like depossess, and the drop body would fall on someone and it could do like 600 damage. That was an unreliable way of dealing damage, and it's dumb. So Puppeteer basics clearly need to be buffed across the board. This makes demons in general a greater threat when they are doing the late game objectives from the dagger and pages and beyond. That's perfect. That's the way it should be. Those objectives should feel like constant pressure at all times. It should feel like, oh man, we're just constantly fighting, and then you breathe a sigh of relief when you finally complete the objective and the demon gets exercised. That's the way that objective should play out, because it's a test for the survivors. They're kind of looting, they're gathering those pages, they're being harassed by the demon, and then the big fight at the dagger and pages and beyond. That's the test to see if they did a good job looting, if they did a good job of sticking together in the early game and not allowing the demon to exhaust too much of their resources. This is a great change, a good buff. Possessed units balance. Basic unit balance changed from 400 to 325. Puppeteer basic unit balance from 330 to 270. Necromancer from 400 to 350. And then the elites, same thing, also had their balance bar nerfed. This one's kind of interesting, because I'm not sure why I'd be interested to hear the reasoning for why they buffed balance bar for demons in a previous patch, and now they have reverted that change and made it easier to stun them. This one I'm kind of on the fence on. I'm really on the fence on this one, because I don't know that they necessarily needed to do this, but at the same time, like this one I'm really tough on, because now it feels like, from what I've played, it feels too easy to break a basic unit's balance bar. But at the same time, it's kind of like, at least in the early game, maybe it should be that way, and I definitely don't think it should be that way for elites. Like, I don't think it should be that easy to break balance bars for elites. I'm going to say that this is a nerf, and I'm going to say it's a bad nerf. It feels too easy to break the balance bar. Now, somebody may have to tell me and give me more context here, if maybe they've added the ability to where, like, possessions have made it to where, you know, now they have a harder time getting stunned later on as the game goes on. But it feels bad, because it feels like it's super easy to stun basics now. And I don't mind basics, like, even necessarily maybe being kind of strong in the beginning, as long as you can't just spam them over and over again and just keep up constant pressure. So I don't know. It doesn't feel good. It feels like it's too strong. When I was playing Warrior, after this patch came out, I was stunning basics and two heavies. And that feels like it's too extreme. Like a basic can't really do much if they're getting completely stunned in 2 hits. And so that's where I feel like maybe this was too much. So I'm going to say that was probably a little bit of an over nerf. But someone else could maybe provide some context in case maybe that there's something that offsets possessed unit balance bars. Demon upgrade possession. Possession costs have been raised across categories to include maintaining possession cost reduction, possession initial cost reduction, possession balance. Cost scales upwards from levels 1 to 5. Warlord and Necromancer have a required threat level to unlock possession upgrade. So this is a nerf and this is a buff. So it's 2 and 2. So first we'll talk about this. Well, it's not even really a buff, is it? It's kind of, I guess they're both kind of nerfs. It's because this one's kind of a nerf and a buff. It's like a nerf early on, but then it's a buff later on. So it's a little bit of both. So I don't really know how you classify this. This is a nerf though. I'm not sure how you classify this. It's a good change. Both of these are good changes. If you want to consider it a nerf, I guess. I mean, it's still a buff like late game. I think it's good either way. Yeah, I think it's good. Like it does exactly what it should, which is that in the beginning, possessions aren't nearly as strong, but if you are somebody who wants to go all in on basic possessions, you can, and then they will be very strong late game, stronger than they were before. And I think that's exactly how it should work. That's perfect. That's exactly what people have been saying. Like, hey, don't make basics as strong early game, but then if people don't want to spec into bosses or something like, or elites, and they still want to play basics, well, they can still do that, and they're going to be even stronger than they were before, and I like that. Warlord and Necromancer have a required threat level 6 to unlock possession upgrade. Again, that's another nerf that basically makes it to where you got to level up a little bit so that survivors have a little bit of time to breathe. And even level 6 is still not, like, unless you're a complete jabroni, you should get to level 6 relatively quick as a demon. So it's not even a huge nerf. So I really like this change a lot. Call it a change. I don't know if you call it a nerf, call it a buff, call it both, but it's a good change. Demon upgrade boss. Boss unit will have increased damage and health on level 4 and 5 for the boss upgrade. That is a buff, and that is a good buff. I think we've all known that bosses needed to be upgraded. They were too weak, and this combined with range damage being nerfed makes bosses much better. I also want to mention this. Again, the freaking subreddit on this game is just pure brain rot, but I saw somebody complaining like, dude, you can't use a boss unit and just they play in a way that is so like brain dead because you could get away with that before this patch. And really you couldn't get away with that before this patch, like with boss units. But like basic unit possessions was so brain dead before this patch that you could just drop a basic, especially as Warlord, you could just drop a basic in the middle of the group, puke and 360 dodge cancel, and you're going to get 3 hits. And even if the team like sticks together fairly well, most of the time, unless they're a super sweaty squad, you're going to be able to do that and at least get those free hits when they're unable to dodge and stuff. And deal a little bit of chip damage, and over time you're going to wear people down. So people were playing super dumb and just dropping units in the middle of a group and being like, well, this is going to work because, they can't stop me. So I saw a thing on Reddit where a guy was like playing Evil Ash, and he dumps Evil Ash in the middle of a group, and he got killed within like 5 seconds. It's like, dude, you can't do that. You can't just drop a boss in the middle of a group and not expect to get annihilated and be like, well, I should be able to drop the boss right in the middle of everybody and just wreck house. It doesn't matter if I'm just sitting there, sitting duck, getting hit left and right from everything. Like, you can't do that, dude. This is a good buff, but all it really means, even with the range changes, is that you still can't drop a boss unit in the middle of everybody. You have to play smart. You have to spawn them somewhere where they're not going to be just getting, you know, ganged up on from all sides. You have to spawn them, and then, like, especially like Evil Ash, like, you got to use your resurrection and all of his skills and not do it in the middle of everybody. So you're stuck in that animation where he's like resurrecting and stuff. Like, you can't do that. You got to use your brain a little bit now. So this is a good buff. That was just a tangent I went off on because it's like, overall in this patch, demons are now going to have a more difficult time winning. That's just the facts. So it's no longer can you just do the same strategy over and over and over and over again and just blindly win the game in the first 3 minutes. Now you got to put a little more effort in. That doesn't necessarily mean that demons are like worse than they were before, but the gameplay is more involved now. And I've seen really good demon players come out and be like, yeah, I'm still winning just as many games as I was before. I just have to play differently now. Like Warlord, I have to go harder on elites now. Like, elites have been buffed quite a bit and are much better on Warlord now, rather than just blindly going all in on basics. So really, really good demons aren't really having any problems with this patch. I've even seen, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to mention this person by name. I've seen a Twitch streamer who plays demon, best demon player I've seen, but they are also the most demon-brained player I've ever seen, where they truly throw a fit when anything survivor-related happens, anything that makes it harder for them to succeed as a demon. All they care about is winning. Even they haven't complained about this patch. When they went in, I watched a clip of them. I was expecting them to go off, be like, I'm done with this game, man. And they didn't, because they're really good. And even they were able to recognize, like, oh, this isn't so bad. Like, I just have different ways of winning now. And I'm still going to win just as much as I did before. It's just not shut your brain off and do the same thing over and over now. Now I have to actually, like, switch up my builds. And it's really only the bad crybabies that you see, like, on the subreddit who come out and like, I can't basic possession spam anymore, so I quit. Like, those people are complaining, but the people who are actually good at demon, who have actually made an effort to, like, experiment and learn different things, are totally fine. So next is Demon Vision. Demon Vision upgrade is increased distance at level 1. Level 2, level 3, basic Demon Vision is reduced from 100 to 85. Now this one is interesting. I don't know how you approach Demon Vision, because on the one hand, I think in an ideal world it would be more difficult to find survivors at the beginning of the game. But a nerf like this basically makes it to where now you kind of have to invest in Demon Vision where you didn't before. But at the same time, it doesn't feel good to invest in it, because all you're doing is now investing in it to gain back what you lost. You know what I mean? Like, before, you just, like, already had this great Demon Vision, and most demon mains I knew who were really good, like, wouldn't even invest in Demon Vision at all. Now you have to, well, you don't have to invest in it, but there's more incentive to invest in it, but purely to get back to the level that it used to be before this patch. So I don't actually know what you do about Demon Vision. I don't know what the solution is. I think it is a cool idea. Maybe it's just as simple as, like, keep it the way it was, but make it to where the spawn logic is different, so that people can't just like memorize where people are going to spawn and just go straight to them. At that point, I don't know that Demon Vision matters as much. So I don't really know what the solution to Demon Vision is. I'm not even going to put anything on the screen about whether or not I think it's a good nerf or a bad nerf. It's clearly a nerf, but I don't know if it's good or bad, because I do think it's a positive change to make it to where survivors can't be found as easily, but at the same time, like taking stuff away and making players have to work harder to get back to the level that it used to be doesn't feel very good. And I've never loved those types of changes. So I don't know what the solution is. This is a tough one. I feel bad for the Saber devs here because I don't know what the solution is. It's interesting. I will say though, because we're playing this game, that I think it's a bad nerf. I think also in the context of the other changes in this patch, maybe this was too much. Like basic units have already been nerfed to where the demon very early game is not much of a threat now. So nerfing demon vision to where it makes it a little bit harder to find people in the early game is not probably necessary, because even if they do find somebody super early game, they're not going to be able to really do much to them. So it's not as big of a deal anymore. So I'll say bad nerf. I feel comfortable saying that. All right, skill changes. Now these are all different, so we'll go through them one at a time. Puppeteer, Puppet Master, Invigorating Possession. The amount of energy recovered per hit has been changed from 0.5 to 1 at level 1 of this skill, and from 1 to level 2. That is a buff, and it's a good buff. Again, Puppeteer needed this. They needed lots of buffs because they were worse than the other two by a decent margin. I don't think they were as bad as some people said. They had some decent strategies. They just couldn't do basic unit possession spam as well as the other two, so a lot of people thought they were worse than they probably were. But I do think they still needed to be buff, and this is a good one. I also think that this is a buff based off of a fix to the bug where you could shoot a down survivor and it would still give you infernal energy like the old bug used to for all demons. I think this perk made it to where they could farm energy off people, and so that probably got fixed, and as a response they're like, well, we got to make this skill still like helpful in some way so people don't just take it off completely. So they buffed it, and I think that's a good buff. Ed, Weapon Master crossbows, the extra damage has been decreased from 10 to 10 or from 20 to 10%. So Ed got a little nerf here to his Weapon Master. It's a good nerf, and the reason it's a good nerf is because you scroll all the way up here. They have made it to where the Master of Crossbow skill affects all crossbows. So it affects the explosive crossbow as well as the normal crossbow. That's why it got nerfed, because the explosive crossbow is nuts. The explosive crossbow is nuts right now. The explosive crossbow is actually really bad as far as like killing bosses. It's terrible. But it's amazing for mobbing. If you take a explosive crossbow on Ed, I think in my first game doing that, I got like 120 kills. And I would have had probably over 150, but I ran out of ammo at the dark ones. So it's insane. Like, it basically frees up your warriors to where they don't have to like waste time taking out ads, and they could just focus on possessions and bosses. So it kind of adds another layer of strategy where it's like normal, and under normal circumstances, your warrior is there to take out most mobs and then tank for when possessions show up, and your hunter is there to take out possessions and deal most of the damage. Now you kind of have the option of switching their roles and maybe speccing into damage as a warrior and taking your hunter and using them to take out all the ads, take out all the AI, and your warrior is going to be there to deal most of the damage and get in the way of the possessions. So you can kind of swap their roles in that regard, which is an interesting play style. And that's why it got nerfed, is because of the explosive crossbow. And the explosive crossbow is nuts. It's a lot of fun, but I have a feeling it's probably going to get nerfed. It's probably going to get nerfed at some point, which stinks because it's really good right now, and it's probably going to get nerfed to where it's no longer useful at all, and then you never pick it up. But for now, I'm going to enjoy it. Kelly, Battle Frenzy, the extra damage per stack has been increased from 1% to 2%. This is a buff. So just as many people predicted, the Battle Frenzy getting nerfed from 2% to 1% in the last patch, was a band-aid fix because of the fact that that ability was bugged and made it to where it was increasing her range damage when it shouldn't have been. Now that that has been fixed, it has correctly been increased from 1% back to 2%. Truth be told, this could probably be buffed even further, but it is a good buff. Because now that it only applies to her melee, this ability sucks. This ability is really bad because if you think about it, Kelly's meant to be a hybrid hunter. She's meant to be a character that can do melee as well as ranged. But the problem is that for damage specifically, she never wants to be using her meat hammer. Like, the only reason she's using her meat hammer is like early game and stuff, to not be using, and even mid to late game to save some ammo when there's no possessions on the field. But it's good enough because she gets such a good increase to balance bar damage with the meat hammer that she could just stun everything in like one hit. So she doesn't care as much about the actual damage that she's dealing with the melee weapon. So this ability is like really bad, could probably be buffed even further. But even if it got buffed further, I don't know that she cares that much about like extra damage, because the only time that extra damage matters to her is when she's fighting a possessed unit. And at that point, you shouldn't be meleeing possessed units. You should be shooting them. So it's kind of a terrible ability. I wouldn't mind seeing Battle Frenzy be like completely changed now into something else, but I don't know that we'll ever see that happen. Scotty Thunder Thrust. Damage has increased from 100 to 150. That is a buff, a very slight buff. It's a good buff. Still probably not enough. Still probably not enough. And I don't know what's going on with his bug. He has a bug, or had a bug, where he could use a heavy attack and then he could hit Q, and it would apply the damage from his heavy attack to his thunder thrust, and then it became really insane. I tested it. I can't get it to work anymore, but I don't know if I'm not doing it right or what's going on. So it seems like it's been fixed. So assuming that that's fixed, assuming that the bug that let him like use a heavy and then dodge cancel out of it really fast, assuming that got fixed as well, he's still really bad because 150 isn't enough. I don't know how you fix him though, because it's kind of like, if you buff him to the point where he can one-shot basics with his thunder thrust, then he becomes probably too strong. But at the same time, like, 150 feels like it's not enough. I think what they want, what they're intending, is that like, you run in, like say a bunch of basics get spawned, you run in, you heavy, you kill whatever you hit, you deal a little bit of chip damage to everything around you, you heavy something else, deal a little bit of damage to everything around you, and then you thunder thrust, and that finishes off everything around you that's weak. That's how I think the devs intend you to play Scotty, because that's also why he has the ability that lowers his fear per kill. Thunder Thrust is supposed to be something that's like your finisher. You're using this to finish off a bunch of weak units. The problem is it doesn't seem to work, because if you do that, then all your teammates are going to wipe out everything around you before you get to that point. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about this needing to be buffed even further. It's a good buff no matter what. But Scotty still doesn't feel great where he's at right now. But I don't know. There's a lot of Scotty mains out there who get pretty upset whenever I say anything negative about Scotty. So he does. I played a lot of Scotty yesterday. He doesn't feel great even still, especially if those bugs got fixed. I didn't personally use those bugs. I only used them to like test how they're supposed to work. So I would like do it once to see, can I make it happen? And then I wouldn't do it again. But I couldn't get it to work at all yesterday, so it seems like it's fixed. Lord Arthur, Fuel to the Fire. Extra duration per finisher has been increased from 3 seconds to 5 seconds. That's a buff, and it is a good buff. Lord Arthur's definitely going to need more love now that his ability has been fixed to where it applied his aura damage to ranged when it wasn't supposed to. That's a common thing for some reason. Kelly and Arthur both had that going on. This is a good thing. It basically makes it easier for him to keep up his Lord's Wrath. So it's a positive change. I still don't know if it's enough for him. It seems like he's still the weakest of the 3 leaders by far. He might need even more buffs. But for now, this is a nice little upgrade to make him usable. So he's not just completely worthless. The last thing I want to talk about is support Ash. I think it's worth mentioning. There's a lot of different changes that happened in this patch, and I can't go over all of them as far as changes that were not listed. Well, I'll mention 2 things. Before we get to support Ash, we'll talk about demons getting changed to where they are slowed down indoors. This is supposed to be a change that I think the devs anticipated would help demon players, because their idea was demons are on ice skates when they're moving around in spirit form, and when they go inside, they have a hard time like maneuvering, and then they move through and they slide into a wall. And I think that they were like, oh, well, we'll just slow them down so that doesn't happen. But it seems like demon mains really don't like that. And it's also now, like I said earlier in the videos, it's introduced this bug where this thing applies occasionally even outside of houses, and then it persists for the whole game, and it's awful. I think this needs to be reverted. I understand that the devs had like good intentions with this, but it seems like the majority of demons don't like this. They don't like that you're slowed down indoors, so it probably needs to be reverted. That's all I could really say. As somebody who doesn't play a lot of demon, I'm not going to go into further detail on that. Maybe there's some demons who do like it, but from what I could tell from people that I know, streamers and stuff who play primarily demon, it seems like they really, really don't like it. So that might need to be reverted. Now, support Ash. Support Ash has been changed to where his flat rate healing has been altered to where he now does a percentage of his damage dealt. So now it's 20% of damage dealt rather than a flat rate of 25. And his mark has also been changed so that when he marks somebody, it lasts for 5 seconds. And then the damage and heal on that, I think, have both been lowered so that it does less per hit, but now it persists for 5 full seconds rather than the mark disappearing after the first thing that hits it. This one was really interesting because when people first told me about this, my jaw dropped and I was like, oh my God, that's a massive buff. And it's not. It's actually a net nerf, because I played a lot of support Ash to get an idea of how it feels and whether or not it feels like a buff or feels like a nerf. It's definitely a big nerf. The 20% is actually, it's a buff if you can find a really high level weapon. Like I had one game in support Ash where I found a legendary hunting knife. And then that made it to where I was healing for more than I did before when I was using a common hunting knife, which is a huge buff in that regard if you find a legendary hunting knife, because now not only are you healing for more on each hit, but now you're actually like dealing damage in combat and being helpful in combat. Whereas before it was like you could use your bare fists a lot of the time and you didn't want to deal more damage. And now it's like you'd be a liability in combat. So with this new change, it's like you want to take the highest rarity weapon that you can find, because the more damage you deal, the greater the percentage that you're going to be healing for. So that kind of makes it so that support Ash is not as much of a liability in combat, but it's harder for him to get the same level of healing that he had before. Because most of the time, you're going to be finding weapons that deal more damage, but they're a lot slower than the hunting knife was. And the biggest thing that impacts him is the fact that they fixed the bug that made it to where he could farm heals off of enemies that were stuck in a finisher animation, another teammate's finisher animation. This is a much bigger deal than you'd think it would be. Did this need to be fixed? Yeah, it probably did. But you'd be surprised how big of a deal this is on the Dagger and Pages and beyond. And those are the objectives where support Ash needs to be healing the most. Because I can't tell you how often I have warriors that are using finishers, which they often do because you get iframes and it stops you from taking as much damage. And now I can't farm heals off of people, so I'm not healing for nearly as much when I'm doing those steps. And it feels like a huge nerf. He just feels worse than he did before. He feels like he doesn't heal for as much. So it's kind of interesting. I think he'll need to be monitored further, but in my significant amount of testing with him, he feels even worse than he did before. It feels like his healing output has been lowered in exchange for being like slightly more useful in combat, and I don't know that that's like... So I think what probably needs to happen is his percentage needs to be raised. I think that his mark is probably fine. His mark is probably fine the way it is. I like that change. But the melee change is probably not as good as it should be. Yeah. It didn't feel very good playing him. Now I think, and here's the other thing too, is like he's in another position where, like, similar to the way he was before, he's probably really good in a coordinated team that knows to take advantage of his marks, that knows not to spam his finishers so that support Ash can actually hit things and heal. But he's terrible in solo queue now because people won't take advantage of your marks and people will spam finishers because they're typically selfish players and want to keep themselves alive and don't really care if you can't farm heals or not. So he's probably the worst character in the game now as far as solo queue is concerned, even worse than Scotty. But he's probably okay in a coordinated group. I still think even in a coordinated group that his percentage could be buffed a little bit, but that should do it. Those are the changes right there. I didn't even say good nerf, bad nerf on that one because, like I said, support Ash is kind of a pseudo nerf, pseudo buff. And then the demon being slowed indoors is kind of a change, not really a nerf or a buff. It's something that a lot of demons would probably say is a nerf, but I don't think it was intended to be that. So that should do it for me. Let me know in the comments what you think. I didn't anticipate this video being 48 minutes long when I started making it, but there's a lot to talk about with all these changes. Pretty exciting changes. I thought this was a fantastic patch. I agreed with like 99% of the stuff that was in this patch. So great job, Saber. Amazing patch. I think they've done a great job overall so far, especially with how critical I was after their first dev stream. I was like, geez Louise, they gave us like no info. It was terrible. They've really listened to feedback and done a great job. So I commend Saber for that. Let me know in the comments what you think about all these nerfs and buffs. I'm sure there will be a lot of people who don't like that I agree with some of the demon nerfs, but I think it's good for the overall health for the game, for both sides. So let me know what you think, and if you made it this far in the video, please subscribe, and thank you for watching as usual. I will see you guys next time.